Hey, I'm working on a project because I do not have a 3D printer like seemingly everyone else, to replace an antique that it seems simple and kind of strange, but it's basically a clothes hanger with a hook that you hang in your kitchen for dish towels or dishwashing gloves, things like that, or I guess whatever you need to hang up. So my mom really wanted this. She found it. It was my great grandmother's, and after a couple weeks of digging it up from wherever, it broke. So I will show you a close-up. It was this piece and this, like this, and then this is the spring, the typical clothespin spring, but much larger than this is what they look like now. And this piece broke, so this was on this side. That was like that. So with this broken off, I cut this with the Dremel. Not the neatest job ever, but doesn't need to be for this. I'm not looking to turn this into a Shark Tank product, especially now that everybody can 3D print things. There's probably a free design for this somewhere, but I'm going the homemade route. So what I did was I cut it off with the Dremel, took apart a modern wooden clothespin, used a couple different types of glue to stick it in here. I did have to widen this part to make sure that there was a good snug fit. And then I also used the Dremel to try and sand these grooves a little bit, just because they typically aren't sanded. So I thought, since it's basically a gift, I'm recreating an old thing, hopefully in time for Mother's Day. So I did try to sand it a little bit. And it seems secure enough for me to make a mold. And what I'm going to use is 2-part silicone putty. Now this only has 3 minutes of working time, so I'm a little nervous about that. But then it cures in 20 minutes. And then comes the epoxy resin part. So we'll see. Okay, so what I have here, I have 3 ounces of A, 3 ounces of B. Time to get mixing. This is not going to be a pretty mold. I'm not using a mold box. All right, hopefully that worked. We'll see in a half an hour. Good sign, kind of firm. Not terrible. All right, I mean, it's got this big ugly divot from the repair, but that's how it's supposed to be. I'm sure if I were an artist of some kind, I could cut away some of that and make it nicer, but I'm fine with this. It's gonna have a hook and a clothespin bottom. Let's pour some epoxy.
This is a really beautiful purple mica powder, and it was nothing extraordinary as far as anything special that I ordered. When I ordered the part A and B kit, it came with packet samples of mica powders in baggies and some popsicle sticks and things like that. So this was just the purple that came with the kit. No chameleon powder or metallics, specified. It does have a wonderful shimmer to it, so it's kind of metallic, but not quite. One of the great things about epoxy resin is that it is self-leveling. Now, if you have a surface that's not level, that can be a problem. Or in this case, a mold and surface that's not level. So the epoxy did keep leveling out. I kept adding more. It ended up over pouring, and I came up with a fix for it later. Did I keep trying to fill that mold even more? Yes, I did. Was it a mistake? Probably. But there were parts of the mold that were very thin.
And now I have too much. Before I put the cover on, well, that's what they look like. They are overfilled for sure. Gonna need some cleanup. Oh no. It might be okay. Okay, that is not bad. I wouldn't use this to cast a bunch. So maybe what I can do is get more appropriate silicone to make a mold out of this, if it works. Kind of thin. But this looks good. Bring it out a little bit. There.
I love that I have this small Dremel. It has just enough power. In fact, it's a completely adjustable setting for the power. That's what the dial on the back end is for. And it comes with a lot of different bits. They've lasted me for years. So what I'm doing here is cleaning up the edges, and there are also some grooves that I'm going to have to manually put in order for the clothespin spring to fit. I had some leftover air dry clay from another project, and it turned out to be a pretty useful tool here. I conditioned the clay, and then I started to add it right to the epoxy resin piece that I pulled from the first pour. And what that did is it gave me the opportunity to make those fragile, thin parts a lot thicker. And I mean, I'm no sculptor, so it probably could have been a much better job, but it did work.
I think this is the best I can do sculpting, and then I'll just have to wait for it to dry. This is air dry clay, so I'll have to wait for it to dry and then sand it. I think sanding will be the best option to even this stuff out and fix the cracks, all these little tiny cracks that I just can't work out.
Since this piece came out with a bend to it, again, nothing's level here. When I cast the epoxy resin next time, I'll take it out of the mold while it's still flexible and then lay it flat. I bought the Mold Star 16 from Smooth On, and it is my first time working with any liquid silicone at all. This was a very easy version of liquid silicone. It was a 1-to-1 ratio, parts A and parts B. I'm showing you the safety data sheet that comes with it and explaining that I was using nitrile gloves because it says not to use latex gloves, and I don't know if nitrile is safe. So if you do use this product, you may want to look into that further. Contact Smooth On, they have good customer service, or even at Reynolds Advanced Materials, which is where I get my Smooth On products. I used 200 ml from the part A and then from the part B. You can see I have my mold, which is a takeout container, over on the right side, and I had hot glued the pieces that I was going to cast. So there's the two pieces of the clothespin hanger, and I did spray it with mold release. And then I went and started stirring because there's a very short work time with this silicone as well, but it is longer than the putty. The instructions for pouring liquid silicone, I watched the Smooth On channel here on YouTube, and what you do is you find the lowest point of your container and then you pour from a higher level, and then that way all of the bubbles should pop. And I say should because I did have some bubbles, but I didn't have any kind of degassing chamber that would fit the whole mold box. So this is what I did, and I did watch it every now and then and pop some surface bubbles, but on the surface that's actually up in this case, that's not the surface that matters. The surface that matters is actually what's inside the box. So it really didn't matter popping bubbles in this case. Unfortunately, there was one, but I was able to put a little fix in that with some just cut off silicone. You'll see that in a bit. What you'll see me doing here is giving it some shakes and taps, because what some people have is a vibration stand, or like it's almost like a paint mixer, and that's an alternative way to get the bubbles to rise to the surface, because like I said, the bubbles are actually underneath the silicone in this case. So I tapped it a bunch and tried to shake it around as best as I could. And here comes the poke test, checking to see if the silicone has actually cured, and I was so happy it appeared to. And it was actually surprisingly hard to get it out of this container, because what other people use is something like an acrylic box that they hot glue together, and then the sides are very easy to take apart. But trying to get the mold out of this container proved to be a challenge. So unfortunately, my liquid silicone did get underneath the items that I was trying to cast and mold. So I had to cut around that. And do yourselves a favor and use a new sharp blade, because in this case, I ended up really chopping that silicone rubber, and it just could have been a much better job. It comes to bite me later, but I had to dig out the items, and then it's just looked like such a disaster. I continued to chop away at this, trying to clean it up, and I'm not sure if I made it worse or any better. If you look closely, you can see the small divot where there was a bubble. Showing off my absolutely unprofessional and amateurish mold here. So you can see that when I was using the box cutter, it was very choppy because it wasn't sharp, and you can't exactly sand this like you can with other kinds of things. So everything's really bumpy. But what my plan was to cast it anyway and then clean up the end result. You can see that there's even very deep slices on the one side. So I had a solution attempt for that as well. And what is that, you might ask? I tried using DAP silicone, which did work, but I will say that it comes right off of the other silicone. So if this was something you needed to use as a fix, also you have to do it every single time you cast into the mold. My backup plan was to go back and use the silicone putty mold but using that DAP sealant to make some barrier walls so that any epoxy that was poured into it wouldn't leak as bad. And really the leaks that happened weren't that bad anyway. This ultra clear DAP silicone needs to cure for about 24 hours anyway. I mixed up the epoxy resin exactly as I had done before, and this time poured it back into the fixed silicone putty mold.
Okay, I'm gonna take this out. I put the DAP silicone clear around here to try to keep it from leaking, and it mostly worked. I did pluck off a couple small pieces. But if I can get this out, then looks like I'm gonna have to peel off the DAP stuff, which I guess, whatever, is the thing to do. Okay, I'm gonna move that mold out of the way, so now I'm gonna clean this stuff off. Probably be better to wear gloves and do this. And I can always file this stuff. It's still crazy thin right there. That is very disappointing. Very, very disappointing. But nonetheless, it casted. And I can move it so that I can make it flatter.
As always, there's extra epoxy resin to make sure that you don't let it go to waste. I found a couple small molds. I have this brand new one, which is a small mold of the state of New Jersey. And then I took the smallest of my skull molds set. What I tried to show quickly there was the vendor and maker name called Redfoot, which was on Etsy. That's where I got the state. They did have all 50 states, and the skull came from the Let's Resin skull set. Getting back to business at hand, it was the clothespin hanger, and here it is all finished. Again, I had to Dremel those ridges into the outside edges in order to get the spring to attach. Thanks for watching this recreation of my great-grandmother's antique clothespin hanger. Here it is in action, holding a pair of dishwashing gloves.